So welcome back, and so welcome to part 3. And so we had talked about the 3 shapes of bacteria: bacillus, and coccus, and spirillum. And here we go. Eubacteria, still talking about the domain bacteria, and the one kingdom in it is eubacteria. And some of the eubacteria are autotrophic. That means they can make their own food. These vocabulary words you should become very comfortable with using. So autotroph is the same thing as producer. This is a good example of an autotrophic bacteria. This is it's called blue-green algae, also called cyanobacteria, and so it's photosynthetic. Remember, the bacteria, not the tube worms themselves, but the bacteria that live in an organ called a trochophore and embedded in their skin, those bacteria are the autotrophic chemosynthetic bacteria. So cyanobacteria are photosynthetic but don't have chloroplasts. Some eubacteria that live in the tissues of these tube worms can do the chemosynthesis. But a lot of other eubacteria are heterotrophic, and these might be the ones that you think of as pathogenic. So the pneumococcus bacteria that causes pneumonia would be actively feeding on lung tissue. A lot of decomposing bacteria are eubacteria. So the bacteria that would break down dead bodies and wastes are eubacteria. So it's important to not think of all bacteria as harmful, because remember, you have about 3 pounds of eubacteria that are all over your body, especially in your gut, that without them you just couldn't live. You need these symbiotic, mutualistic eubacteria living inside you to help you. So there are some harmful bacteria out there, but I would say the overwhelming majority would have either no effect or be helpful to humans. Okay, so next kingdom in your notes, we're on number 3. Now we're in a new domain. Now we're in the domain Eukarya. Remember, there's only 3 domains: Archaea, Bacteria, and Eukarya. And there's only one kingdom in each of the previous 2 domains. The domain Archaea only had 1 kingdom, Archaebacteria. The domain Bacteria only had 1 kingdom, Eubacteria. The domain Eukarya has 4 kingdoms, and the first one we're going to look at is the kingdom Fungi. This happens to be a bracket fungus, which would be, shelf fungus that's embedded within the tree. This is just the fruiting body. The part that you can see is the part that helps it reproduce with spores. The majority of this organism has extended itself into the tree that it's feeding on. It's actively decomposing. These are morels, which are Basidiomycota, which are a type of fungus. Again, this is the fruiting body. This is leaf litter in the woods, and the most of that organism is existing as this stuff called hyphae, an interconnected network of cells that share cytoplasm, and it's just actively digesting all of that leaf litter and breaking it down. And it's a good thing that we have decomposers like funguses, because if we didn't, then the leaves would just pile up and pile up and pile up, and then there'd be no way to get rid of them. This is a single-celled fungus, the only single-celled fungus there is. It's called yeast, and this happens to be a baby butt, and that's a yeast infection. All right, so this is the hyphae I was talking about. If you think about like a moldy peach, the mold that you would see, that greenish stuff on the outside of the peach, would be the fruiting bodies, the spore producing. Most of it that would be underneath the skin of the peach, turning it to mush, existing as these networks of hyphae, these cells that share cytoplasm between them. And funguses digest food extracellularly. They secrete digestive enzymes into the substrate, whatever they're digesting, basically turn the tissues of that substance to mush, and then absorb the nutrients that are now available. So here are characteristics that would make a fungus a fungus. All funguses have to be eukaryotic, which you should memorize. That means their cells have nuclei. mostly funguses are multicellular. And there's only one unicellular variety, and that's the yeast. All funguses have cell walls made of this stuff called chitin. That's an important distinction. We're going to play games on quizzes like you're going to have a set of characteristics and you're going to say, well, this has to be in the kingdom fungi because one of those will be chitin. If you see chitin, think fungi. So the chitin compound is very durable, which allows funguses to live in some pretty inhospitable places. Okay, all fungi are heterotrophic. That means they feed on other things. Sometimes people see mushrooms and think they kind of look like plants, so they should be autotrophic. But it turns out all fungi are eating other things, and usually they're decomposing them. So fungi are the only kind of decomposer other than bacteria. And it's pretty neat. There's two really kingdoms of decomposers, the bacteria kingdoms really, and the kingdom fungi. And it's interesting that funguses are secreting chemicals that kill bacteria, like penicillin comes from bread mold. It's an antibiotic. Antibiotics kill only bacteria. So it's interesting that a fungus would produce a chemical that kills bacteria. It's like they're fighting off the bacteria so the bacteria don't eat their food source. And there are antifungal agents that are produced by bacteria for the same reason. It's like they're engaged in chemical warfare. It's very interesting. Okay, so next kingdom, we're still in the domain Eukarya. The next kingdom is the kingdom Plantae. And plants are all eukaryotic. They're in the domain Eukarya. Their cell structures, they're always multicellular. There's no unicellular plants. They all have cell walls that are made of a compound called cellulose, which we'll talk about a lot. But so again, if you hear the word chitin, you want to think fungus. If you hear the word cellulose, you want to think plants in the kingdom Plantae. So all plants have organelles in their cells called chloroplasts. That's the organelle where photosynthesis happens. And that's what allows them to be autotrophic. They're all non-motile, which basically means they can't move. They can't get up and move from one place to another. But like we talked about before in the case of phototropism, plants do have the ability to move and follow the sun, but they just can't get up and move from one place to another. And all plants are autotrophs. They all can make their own food. And you might say, well, Mr. H, look at this. Look at what's going on here. This Venus flytrap is obviously acting as a heterotroph because it's eating this wasp. Couldn't be any plainer. Well, it turns out it's still an autotroph because it has the ability to feed itself. It actually doesn't ever need to eat insects. What it does is it captures them and kind of there's some enzymes in liquid in here that eventually, over a very long period of time, will break down the insect. And the nutrients kind of act as a fertilizer, but it's not the same thing as eating. It's not really taking it in through a digestive tract and slowly breaking it down. So if it has the ability to be feeding itself, we have to call it an autotroph. Okay, next kingdom. Again, we're still in the domain Eukarya. We're talking the kingdom Animalia. They're all eukaryotic. They all have nuclei in all their cells. This is a planaria. That's about 1 millimeter or so long. Wonderful regenerative capabilities. You can cut these things into 200 pieces and you'll get 200 new planaria. And, this is a blue whale, largest animal on Earth. Yeah, they're all eukaryotic. They all have cells with nuclei. And they're always multicellular. There are no unicellular animals. All animals are, by definition, heterotrophic. In my fish tank, you'll notice there's some, that bright green coral that's in there. There's some other anemones that have symbiotic bacteria living inside their tissues that can do photosynthesis. But the animal is still classified as a heterotroph because they can still, they really have to eat other things. They don't have any cell walls. So one thing that's important to understand is all cells, even bacteria, are going to have a cell membrane. So plant cells have cell membranes, animal cells have cell membrane, fungus cells have cell membranes. Some cells also have cell walls, like plant cells have cell walls, fungi cells have cell walls, bacteria cells have cell walls. Animal cells never have cell walls, only cell membranes. And all animals, well, most of them anyways, are motile. That means they can get up and move from one place to another for at least some part of their life cycle. Even a lot of the anemones that are in my saltwater fish tank have the ability to, believe it or not, move from one place to another. They just end up sticking out, like hanging out in one place for a long time because they like that place. But every once in a while, you'll see my big purple anemone pick up and move to the other side of the tank. So in animals, we have invertebrates and vertebrates. So we talked about the difference. We are vertebrates because we have backbones. This guy right here would be an invertebrate. He doesn't have a backbone. Anemones don't have backbones. Worms don't have backbones. All right, the last kingdom is the kingdom Protista. And this one's kind of called the miscellaneous kingdom or the odds and ends kingdom. It's kind of like if it's not able to be properly classified in one of the other 5 kingdoms, we put it in the kingdom Protista as a fallback. It's an imperfect system, but that's what we do. These two right here you have to know. This is an amoeba. We showed you a picture, actually a movie of one of those in the beginning of class. That's the one that blobs around with that cytoplasmic streaming and forming these false feet called pseudopodia. And this is the paramecium. It always kind of looks like a slipper with these hair-like cilia on the outside. These guys move really fast. The amoeba moves really slow. This is a euglena. We'll talk more about them later. So the kingdom Protista, oh, that's an amoeba. And this is a paramecium. You do have to know what these look like. You'll be asked questions about them. Okay, kingdom Protista are all eukaryotic. That's why they're in the domain eukarya. That's what places you in the domain eukarya. They're mostly unicellular, although this one, called a volvox, you'll look at these in 2 weeks under a microscope. This is, technically, it's a colonial organism, which would be the most primitive form of multicellularity. All the cells are basically the same. They're just kind of connected together. They don't have any specialization. These big green circles, or little green circles, these are actually daughter colonies that'll eventually be ushered to the outside and form new colonies. But yeah, that's the volvox. Mostly unicellular, but some are multicellular like this guy. So the paramecium and the amoeba would both be unicellular. They can be heterotrophic or autotrophic. A good way to guess is if it's green, it's probably an autotroph. If it's not, it's probably a heterotroph. So autotrophs can do photosynthesis. Any autotrophic protist would properly be called an algae. So this would be an algae. The stringy green stuff in fish tanks is called an algae. The heterotrophic protists are called protozoa. You keep animals in a zoo. So this is saying animal-like protists are called protozoa. So the amoeba and the paramecia would both be examples of protozoans. So here's some questions for you to think about. Pause, and I'll answer them right now. So members of the kingdom fungi are different from the plants because they're all heterotrophs. All fungi are heterotrophs, all plantae are autotroph, and also there are some unicellular funguses and there's no unicellular plants. And the cell wall composition of fungi contains chitin. The cell walls of plants are just cellulose. Second question, all prokaryotes belong in the kingdom Monera, back in the 5 kingdom system. So all bacteria would be in the kingdom Monera. And now in the 6 kingdom system, we've got 2 kingdoms of bacteria, Archaebacteria kingdom and Eubacteria kingdom.